So in today's video, we are going to tackle one of the very common questions that I get across, especially from clients who are based in Australia, that they understand the tax benefits of maybe moving to Dubai or having a business there. But for some personal or professional circumstances, they're not able to move to Dubai. And the question comes that can I still set up a company in Dubai and benefit from the tax regime in Dubai while staying in Australia and remaining a tax resident in Australia? So it's the question that we are going to answer today. With me is Bradley Murphy from Murphy Tax, based in Melbourne, to help us answer this question. Bradley, welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Shiraz. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah. So as I've laid down the question, what's your understanding of this? That clients do not want to move to Dubai, but want to set up a company in Dubai and then use some of the tax benefits. Is it even possible? What's your experience, or how do you see it?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And as you said, certainly a very common question we get answered or asked by clients. Look, it's certainly very possible to do that. It is possible to remain Australian resident and have an offshore company like a Dubai company. But there are some very important tax rules to consider on the Australian side, and it is certainly a lot more difficult to get tax efficiencies as compared to moving to Dubai. The real two key rules to consider if you're going to remain in Australia are the Central Management and Control Rule, called the CMAC rule, or the Controlled Foreign Company rules, the CFC rules. So really two rules there to consider for Australian residents that have a Dubai company controlled from Australia. Now, these rules basically operate at a high level to say that if you're living in Australia and you have a Dubai company, if that company is controlled from Australia by the shareholders and directors in Australia, that the income and profits of that Dubai company is taxed back in Australia and subject to Australian company tax on those profits. So that's the first key point to consider is, are the shareholders and directors controlling this company, from Australia? The second one, the CFC rules look at, are you providing goods or services to Australian clients or selling goods to Australian customers? And similar to the CMAC rules, the CFC rules say that if you are selling goods to Australian clients or customers, then the income is effectively taxable back to the Australian owners. So I think that's always the backdrop when you've got Australian directors and shareholders of a Dubai company living in Australia, is how to plan for those two rules. Having said that, if there's certainly some scope to look at the control of these companies, who can control it. Does it have to be Australian residents, or could it be offshore controllers to get out of these control rules potentially? Or secondly, we look at, if it's a case that the Australian directors and shareholders need to remain in Australia, but they want to Dubai company for global expansion, for a global head office, to utilize Dubai as a fantastic global headquarter to expand. How do you manage that from Australia? And there are a number of ways you could do it, which I'll touch on in a moment. But um, I guess the three key ways would be, you could look to have an Australian parent company and a Dubai subsidiary. And effectively, one of the advantages of that is that a dividend paid from a Dubai company to Australia, where it's owned by the Australian head company, is not taxable to the Australian company at the company level back in Australia. So that's a very good way of getting low tax profits in Dubai, or 0% profits tax potentially, back to Australia, and you still pay no tax at the company level in Australia. The issue is thereafter, how do you get those profits out of the Australian company into the shareholders' hands, which is a more complex part.
Thank you for that. Backdrop that you have laid out. So the question is that now, assuming that the clients who are staying in Dubai, who are staying in Australia, and then they have a company in Dubai for global operations, let's say, not necessarily selling back to um, Australia, clients in Australia, right? What sort of corporate tax rate do they expect under the CFC or the Controlled Foreign Corporation laws? What sort of corporate tax would that be? And is this a good strategy? Because anyways, you are paying corporate tax to the ATO for your companies in Dubai. So is it worth the effort to go and set that up just from tax benefit? Some people, they don't have this idea of global expansion or headquarters, just like they want to optimize for the best possible tax situation, right? So, maybe we have optimized from UAE tax side, but if we are paying ATO back taxes, is it even worth doing that, or how does that fits in?
It's a great question, Shiraz. Look, from a pure tax perspective, it's certainly a lot harder and sometimes not worth it because, um, so in saying that, it really does depend on what you need the funds for. Is it at the business level or the shareholder level in the owner's hands? Because basically, if these CMAC or CFC rules apply, then the profits are taxed at between 25 to 30% at the company level in Australia, or it could be as high as 47% if the CFC rules apply. So if those rules were to apply, there's not much utility or benefit in really operating this structure. It does basically make it quite restrictive from a tax perspective. Having said that, if the goal is to really reinvest it at the company level in Australia, as I mentioned, you can get profits back from Dubai to the Australian company by way of a dividend, and there's no tax payable to the Australian company. But you would need to make sure in that case that the company is not controlled from Australia. So that CMAC rule, the Central Management and Control Rule, is really important in this. If that rule does apply, so if you're going to have Australian owners, it's a lot harder to get the real tax benefits for sure. But I'll also say that there is other ways of utilizing this structure. Certainly by looking at management fees and transfer pricing back into Australia as well. So looking at things in terms of head office charges, management, finance charges, brand repatriation back into Australia. This structure can certainly still work. It just does depend a lot on the overall structure and goal of the business.
So coming to the management control side of things, right? So we are assuming that the main owner of the company or the main beneficiary is staying in Australia, not relocating, right?
Yeah,
Is it possible to hire local directors in the UAE to run, operate, and manage the company? They're not beneficiaries or they're not the shareholders, they're just employees, but at a senior level, does that helps the client, satisfy or stay out of the management control rules? Because, maybe the operations or s- signing the contracts or managing the bank accounts is with the director in Dubai, because that's by law, you need to be a UAE resident to do all these things. But the ultimate decision making maybe remains with the owner in Australia, right? So the strategic decision, how to work, what to market, and stuff like that. So it's not 100% management control being transferred. There would something will retain. So how do you see that?
fantastic question again. So this controls test looks at who is actually controlling the company, and the starting point is the directors of the company. So the ATO would look at, in terms of this control test, who are the directors of the company and where are they based. So certainly having non-resident directors in Dubai is very helpful to show that the control is not happening from Australia. But of course, the ATO, the tax rules in Australia say um, they would look throughout to say who is actually calling the shots and who is controlling the company, as a matter of fact. And that looks at, looking at things like board minutes, emails, where the key employees are located, where shareholders are based. So it would certainly would help to have directors in Dubai and certainly key employees from Dubai as well. That would be very, very beneficial. But I think it's just important to bear in mind that the ATO approach is very much so a holistic approach, looking at the factual circumstances of who is actually controlling the company and not the directors in isolation. But I would add just to that, Shiraz, that certainly having a genuine commercial presence in Dubai from a business perspective is very helpful as well. But certainly local directors is also certainly recommended for sure.
Sure. Thank you. So, Bradley, most of the clients that we work with or I help relocate to from Australia to Dubai, right? What we work is to change their tax residency to Dubai as well. We help them move out of Australia, declare themselves non-tax resident in Australia and become a tax resident in Dubai, in addition to having and operating their companies from Dubai. So that's the structure that works very well for us and our clients. Now, I understand that the structure that we are discussing today has limited scope, but it can be beneficial to certain type of clients. And as you said, the benefit can come from tax-free dividends, repatriating back to Australia, and then the management fee and the IP fee that that kind of a structure where the management fee and the IP fee can move to Dubai in a tax-free manner. So these are few scenarios, and I don't know, like there would be clients who can benefit from this, but what it sounds is a bit of a complicated structure. And you need to be a tax expert, or you need to have a tax expert on your side who's very strong in international tax laws, right? Now, if I go to just my accountant and I say like, hey, can you structure that for me? I don't find that confidence on that structure because, the upside may be just a tax-free dividend, but the downside is that AQ can penalize heavily on that structure by assuming that, okay, you tried to do something and, that was incorrect from the tax perspective, right? So let's assume that someone can benefit from this structure, but how can they get confidence that what they're doing is accurate and the ATO will see it as they're structuring it and not like, trying to see it that they're trying to evade any taxes by going offshore?
Yeah, and we see it a lot in terms of it's a bit of a misconception we see with clients to say, well, they would come to us saying, we want to, incorporate an offshore company in Dubai, for example, and, basically not pay Australian taxes. And, when we explain to them, it's actually, that can be quite difficult. In the, most countries in Australia, Canada, the UK, US, New Zealand, etc., have similar rules that say that if the shareholders are in those countries, then having a Dubai company, for example, is not overly helpful. It's actually taxed locally in these countries. So it's a case of really, getting good tax advice to really make sure you're compliant with the ATO, first and foremost, because to your point, Shiraz, if the ATO was to do a review on this and say that CMAC and control is actually happening from Australia, the onus is on the taxpayer to show that actually it's not. And if you've been negligent or reckless, there's penalties to apply in addition to the actual 25% tax that's been due over the previous period. So it's certainly really important to get it right. You want to make sure you've got good records, documentation, advice, even considering approaching the Commissioner of Taxation in Australia for a ruling, perhaps. So there are ways you can mitigate the risk, of course, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you get the right advice by the right advisor for sure. Um, and it's certainly a complex area, no doubt about it.
Well, thank you, Bradley, for joining me today. I think that's it for today. And if any of the viewers who want to get connected with myself and or Bradley, the links would be in the description below to book the calls. Thank you, Bradley, for your time today.
Thanks, Shiraz. Appreciate it.